Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to the 63rd day of Humanity Rising. Every day since the 22nd of May, Ubiquity University and over 300 partners from all over the world have convened what is essentially an open space between 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock p.m. Central European Time, so that people everywhere can come together and share their experiences of how it is to navigate through an extraordinary epidemic like this coronavirus, and to not only share what they're going through, but to come together to understand as deeply as we can the gravity of the current global crisis, of which this pandemic is a signal that the human race needs to get its act together and come together in a way that can ensure that as we move beyond the pandemic, the world will become more sustainable, more abundant, more resilient, more healthy, and in alignment with natural systems. All of us know that basically we're running out of time. Scientists the world over are saying that this next 10 years between 2020 and 2030 may be the most important 10 years in the history of the human race. All the major indicators are getting worse, not better. And if we don't somehow come to grips with how humanity can rise to this crisis and transform it into an opportunity for human renewal, we may lose the world as we know it. And that was the impulse that motivated us at Ubiquity University and the partners to come together to convene Humanity Rising. The most fundamental question is how we enhance our strategic effectiveness. How can we come together in a way that actually makes a difference in the post-pandemic world? All of us were thrilled in April when the city of Amsterdam, undergoing the pandemic just like cities everywhere in the world, made the decision as a city to embrace doughnut economics, to put human well-being at the center of municipal concerns, and to develop human well-being within the context of natural systems and ecological constraints. This was an inspiration. It meant that a major metropolitan city was understanding the gravity of the pandemic and taking very specific action. And within weeks, cities from around the world were indicating interest and want to join in. And the most recent major city being Copenhagen, who hasn't completely made the decision, but is on its way. So since we're looking for solutions that are as easily understood as a donut, can be embraced by individuals, families, communities, cities, countries, the world, and therefore is globally scalable, we decided that we would do everything we could to support Amsterdam's initiative and what Kate Rayworth and others are doing to disseminate doughnut economics. And in addition, to talk about generative economics, regenerative economics, all kinds of alternative economic and financial models. We were very fortunate to come into dialogue with Ed Muller, who's the founder and president of the University for International Cooperation in Costa Rica. He's had a very distinguished career over many decades in environmental justice and environmental activism. He's been working on doughnut and regenerative and other kinds of economics for many, many years. So I want to now introduce Ed who is a co-convener with me over the next 7 days, and will introduce the program and lead us through the session and day by day until the 29th of July. Ed, it's a real pleasure, my friend.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Jim. Thank you for the invite. These are challenging times, and I'm so glad that we'll have some good friends with us on this 7-day journey. When he initially asked me to speak, and then he invited me to help organize this series, basically what I did was have the opportunity to put out something that's been going in my head and in our projects for a while. And the way I see it is we really need to act fast. And I've been working on global change for many, many years now. But then we need to actually give examples, show easy ways out. And I'm going to give a short, well, a medium introduction talk to go over some of these issues and how actually the transitioning to a Doughnut economics model, to the use of regenerative economics, the economy of the common good, WellBeing economy, and the alliance, and actually an initiative which I've been working with, and Steve Waddell is going to be with us in the commenting part of this session today on bouncing beyond. It is clear that we cannot bounce back. And I want to go over some of the reasons why we can't bounce back. And I want to actually show what we've been thinking on how to be able to move on to a new thing. So I'll share my screen and start with a review of why we need regeneration. We needed regeneration over the past 20 or 30 years at least. Sustainability did not happen. And we're getting to very critical tipping points. Many people know about climate change, but I want to give actually a bigger overview of the main issues that we have to be concerned with. And even if we were already working on regeneration, what happened with this beautiful opportunity that this virus gave us, which nature actually sent to us to say, wake up, people, this is a fire drill. You can get rid of me, you can get a vaccine, but there is no turning back with planetary collapse. There is no turning back with extreme climate change. So we have the opportunity to take this seriously and think really of how to move forward collectively at a planetary scale to end up with a planet that offers well-being to all life forms and that can keep providing the conditions for us to keep on. So working with biodiversity for decades, I already knew that we had to cross a bridge into a different relationship with biodiversity. All the efforts that we did with IUCN, with the CBD, with the program work in protected areas, I just didn't see those being effective. And we already needed to go across that bridge to that new relationship. And now we're there forcefully having to decide if we want to come back to the old system or if we do want to cross that bridge into a different world. Back in the 80s, 87, when I read the common future, our common future, that's 33 years since we came up with a definition of sustainability being the ability for the next generations to thrive. And after 500 million results in Google, we never achieved this sustainability. And the kids are angry. They're angry because Earth is dying. They're angry because we need to act now and nobody's really acting now. And they're angry because they know they can't eat money. Our generation is fixed on money. Their generation is starting to change that. So I see great opportunity in joining the wisdom of older experts And this youth that really needs to move from pointing fingers and saying who's to blame to actually being able to co-create solutions. So that's our biggest challenge, to co-create solutions together. We are at the tipping points. I mean, 38 degrees centigrade in the Arctic Circle, the huge forest fires around the planet. We're getting to the abrupt climate change that scientists told us about many, many decades ago. Actually, I question if we're not in our civilization's historical moment, just like the Roman Empire collapsed. I think the human global empire is in the process of collapsing. We've lost credibility in the governing structures. We've basically gotten to a planet to a point where people have to migrate. All these things were basically already in documents many decades ago, and we just didn't react on time. I'll go over a refreshing of the planetary boundaries, which is the basis for a lot of our work today in regenerative development. When I started working 10 years ago in the conceptual framework of regenerative development, the planetary boundaries played an important role. And it's also the outside of Kate Raworth's donut. So a lot of people are talking about climate change, but actually, to keep the safe operating space for humanity, we are already in the Anthropocene. This means that the planetary changes are a result of human activity. And it isn't really climate change that has the highest threat to our comfort zone. It's biodiversity loss. And a lot of people don't have that in their radar. The petrochemical companies and the academia as such have also been able to keep under the radar the huge responsibility that chemicals have in the way we produce our food. And land use change, of course, has to do also with agriculture. And then we have climate change. Now, very interesting aspect is that out of the planetary changes, the global changes, agriculture is responsible for about 80% of them. It's only responsible for about 30% of climate change. But if we do want to save the planet, we have to first quit putting poison on what we're going to eat and allow really regenerative agriculture process, which actually can save the planet by capturing the carbon that's in the atmosphere and putting it beneath our feet in the soil. So it's not written only in reports, in peer-reviewed journals, in big libraries. It's all over the place that biodiversity loss is the real end of the world. And very few people are actually taking this seriously. We worked hard. I was at that time, both in IUCN and UNESCO MAP program and through the university, a negotiator in Nagoya, where we finally got the strategic plan and the Aichi targets approved. It was a difficult negotiation. And by 2020, by this year, biodiversity values were supposed to be integrated in all of the accounting. The true value of biodiversity, not as an externality, not as a philanthropic greenwash, but really incorporated all the way into national accounting to be able to live in harmony with nature. 2020 came and we're even worse than we were in 2010. And 2010 was actually the year when we had to have halted biodiversity loss already. I had the privilege of growing up very close with nature, and it's impossible not to become a photographer in a country like mine. These are all photos I've taken throughout our areas, regular areas that are around a day's drive or less from my house. So I grew up with this tremendous biodiversity. I also had the privilege to grow up in a region with huge cultural diversity. And this cultural diversity is disappearing quicker than our biodiversity. And the knowledge embedded in these cultures is vital for learning how to live in this regenerative planet where we need to bring ecosystems back to their functions. The kid on the left, that was a photo of him 3.5 years old. That's my older son. That's him now, and he himself has a child. And on the right is my youngest son. He's now 8. But at 3.5 years, he was already walking through protected areas. Now, the sad part is that he got to see only half the life than his older brother got to see. And my granddaughter might only be able to see 20 or 30% or even less of the life that her father saw. And I think that is something that we owe these children a different future. Laudato Si, the Pope's encyclica, says it very clearly. Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, who produces various fruit and colored flowers and herbs, this sister now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her. We have come to see ourselves as her lords and masters, entitled to plunder her at will. The violence present in our hearts is also reflected in the symptoms of sickness evident in the soil, in the water, in the air, and in all forms of life. We have forgotten that we ourselves are dust of the earth. Our very bodies are made up of her elements. We breathe her air, we receive life, and we drink from her waters. So we actually have to solve this using more than just tools, using more than just mechanistic solutions. It is an important transformation from our inner selves, a deep consciousness. We know all the science. We know all the relationships of our planetary footprints, our human footprints on this planet. It's all there. Actually, I always say this is the best scientifically documented planetary extinction. We produce more data every year than in previous years. Lots of information, some knowledge, but it's not this that's going to get us beyond. We need to generate wisdom. We need to think deeply about what we're doing. And one of the reasons I think we lost the ability to create wisdom is because all our educational system is reductionist, it's disciplinary, and we're facing complex problems that need holistic solutions. No university, or very few of them, are prepared to actually work with holistic solutions. We need to move ahead, and to move ahead, we need to get a sledgehammer and throw down the walls between the departments and get these great scientists starting to open their minds. That means we need to reinvent the peer-reviewed journals, which are very reductionist. So we need to move beyond our knowledge system and really start opening up our minds and our hearts. If you look up wisdom in Wikipedia, it is the ability to think and act using knowledge, experience, understanding, common sense, and insight. But the best part is it is associated with attributes such as compassion, experiential self-knowledge, non-attachment, and the virtues such as ethics and benevolence. So are we actually doing this in our educational systems from kindergarten all the way to university? Are we doing it in the political dimensions? Are we doing it in our own lives? So are we going to be mere spectators of a new normal, or are we going to co-create a better future? I'm not going to stay waiting and just looking from behind. We need to move forward. We need to step up. We need to activate. These are kids I've met throughout Latin America, all the way from Mexico down to Chile. And we owe them because they are happy. They are innocent, but they are the ones suffering. They're the first ones to really take the burden. And it's just unforgivable that we in our academic discussions don't really know what we're fighting for. We need to actually get these kids a better future. So we do stand in a moment very critical for Earth's history as the Earth Charter starts. It's a moment when all of us as humanity must choose our future. It is a moment when the world, as it becomes increasingly interdependent and fragile, it provides us with great promise, but also with great peril. So we need to think quickly, we need to act quickly, we need to do quickly. So to move forward, we must really recognize that in the midst of the magnificent diversity of cultures and life forms, which I just went over, we are one human family and one earth community with one common destiny. If we could get this sentence clear, we'd be in another dimension. If this sentence were taught to all our PhDs, to all our political people, leaders, we would be in a different dimension. We've been told that we need to learn to adapt to climate change. We need to learn to adapt to a collapsing planet. I don't believe this is true. We need to build the future we want. I'm not going to stay sitting and waiting to learn how to live in a planet that's falling apart. We need to take action and together co-create that future we want. We need to realize that we made a big mistake when we started with environmental education, where we told people we had to take care of nature. Nature doesn't need us to take care of it. It just needs us to let it live, let it thrive, and it will give us plentiness. It will give us abundance. But our system is rigged into scarcity. So we need to invert this. We need to tell people, if nature is not functioning, if nature is not alive, you won't be alive. So we need to allow nature to come back. And it has shown in these 5 months vacation we've given it, that it is still willing to help us. It is still resilient enough to build it to a functioning state. It probably won't be the same nature because extinction is forever, but we still can get a functioning planet if we act quickly. As I mentioned, it sent us this virus, not to disrupt our system, but to slap us in the face and make us wake up to see what a disruptive, unreliable, unresilient system we have built over the last few hundred years that doesn't even allow life to continue on this beautiful planet. This virus might have a vaccine, but as I mentioned earlier, these tipping points are leading us to no return. And by the time we wake up, if we don't act now, it will be too late to get back to a balance. So we are nature. We are part of nature. We're not separate from nature. And that has to be clear to all of us. Earth, our home, our home. So humanity is part of a vast evolving universe. It's a dynamic process. Our home is alive with a unique community of life. The forces of nature make existence a demanding and uncertain adventure, but Earth has provided the conditions essential to life's evolution. The resilience of the community of life and the well-being of humanity depend upon preserving a healthy biosphere with all its ecological systems, a rich variety of plants and animals, fertile soils, pure waters, and clean air. This is the Earth Charter. It's 20 years old today. If we would have listened to this 20 years ago, we would be in a different position. So we basically need to reinvent ourselves. We need to open up with new energy. We need to move into a new relationship between humans and our Mother Nature. I used to think of a revolution. I now think we need an evolution. So it's going from ego economy, ego society, ego person to the eco society, to the eco economics, but that is not enough. Those are still mechanistic. We need to transition to Seva. And Isha Black and Danielle Vaha has stated her, that's where I got the information from, is giving more than you take. So it's humanity in service of nature. And that is a transition we need to take. We need to get back that community feeling, that glue that holds communities together. We need to transcend the human thinking of superiority over nature and elevate the importance of cycles, relationships, and care of life. Care of life. And care of life is exactly the feminine principle. The caring for. And Leonardo Boff has worked a lot with the feminine principle. The caring capacity, the feeling of belonging to a greater whole, generating power, vitality, and spirituality. That is the way forward. That is what we have to work with our kids, to be able to empower this new way of society, of community. We already know that GDP never measured development, and we're still using it. In my country, we're still using it. We're worried about the deficit of GDP, and it has a very good correlation with inequality. So we are having examples now. We're actually, the best way to be able to change people's attitudes is by showing them. And I think that's one of the marvelous things that Amsterdam has done with Kate, is actually showing how to rebuild post-COVID to a better way of life. And this makes me question, I'm from German descent, my father's German, I lived in Germany, so I'm using it as an example, questioning what development actually is. As I grew up, going to Germany on summer vacations, and I even went to school there for a while, I thought, wow, Costa Rica has to follow Germany's steps. That's what's development about. And then I came to realize that Germany is unsustainable ever since before I was born. And if we look at Germany's donut, yeah, sure, they have the social threshold at 100%, but at what cost? So that means that the German society is living in the well-being it has today because it chewed up the resources, sucked out the resources from other parts of the planet. And that is not fair. Look at Australia. I mean, gosh, what a way to destroy a continent. That is not development. And now, is this government? Is it business? Or is it us? It is us. This is not government. Government won't solve this. The United Nations won't solve this. The SDGs won't solve this. It is us, the people, who have to shift our way of thinking and doing. Have the people from Bangladesh chosen to live like this? Yeah, their planetary boundaries are way, way within their biophysical capacity of the country, but their social threshold is not there. This inequality throughout the planet has to be reversed. I'll just take two examples, Costa Rica and Chile, both from Latin America, both are unsustainable. Our footprint is above our biocapacity. If you look at the donut, if you look at the social threshold, Chile and Costa Rica are similar. Chile has double the inequality, and that's why the society collapsed last year. People were left outside of the system. Okay, the system was for businessmen, for corporate, for politicians linked to all the sector. Now, Chile has achieved a lower social threshold with a lot bigger footprint. So I would say actually Costa Rica is a better model for development. And if we look at the social progress index in terms of health and wellness, we're at the same level of Germany and Chile is below us. So I dare say that Costa Rica's development model should be the model for Germany to start rethinking its development process. And that is what led me to think of an initiative to regenerate the whole country, regenerate Costa Rica. And I'm not doing it alone. I'm doing it with friends like Kate, like Danielle, like John Fullerton. We have lots of these people on this week with us. So we're just thinking of putting our country into the correct donut. And this donut methodology has allowed us to actually identify the low-hanging fruit. Where do we make the biggest impact? And we have had huge support from all these friends from different organizations globally and nationally. I would need 3 or 4 pages to be able to put all the logos of the groups that are collaborating, friends that are collaborating with us. And basically, it's this concept which I developed many years ago on the integration of these 6 dimensions into a holistic approach, moving away from disciplinarity, moving away from reductionism, and really integrating this at the territorial level, at the landscape level. So it's a holistic development where we recognize that a functioning nature is the basis for all life. And it's this new symbiotic relationship that will benefit all of life forms. Now we need to measure it differently. So we need to measure it with equality, with transparency, with peace, with true education, with happiness and hope. We need to move to well-being for all. So basically the actions, and I'll be very brief because I'll touch this again day after tomorrow when we see places that are applying the donut, is getting back to functional landscapes. And we can do this by turning our regular cattle, which is carbon intensive, it produces methane, to carbon negative cattle production together with savory. And we're in the process of becoming a savory hub. Regenerative agriculture, we are one of the highest importers of chemicals per capita in the world. Getting rid of those and turning every piece of agriculture to regenerative will actually get us to being totally carbon negative over a few years. It's not decades. We need social regeneration. We need to get people to participate in decision making, empower them for local governance. We need regenerative economies that are focused on community and life and not just profit. We need to regenerate the culture that glues. For some people, culture is art, it's music, it's theaters. For us, culture is the glue that brings communities together. And it's very, very important to really generate that awareness of our common origin, our mutual belonging, and a future to be shared with everyone. So no discrimination, everything fits together. We need regenerative politics. We need to reinvent our political system. We need to get young people educated to take over political positions, get us old guys out of the president's position, but especially young women. If we had young women in power, this world would be different. And the spiritual component, which academia kind of gets uneasy when I talk about spirituality with other academics. We're not talking about religion. We're talking about ethics, values, deep consciousness, mindfulness, a reverence for life. And how do we do it? A lot of initiatives look at the most complex problems, but they require a huge amount of resources. We can actually solve a lot of our basic problems with very little resources, and that's what empowers communities. Let's get your main issues solved. And I've been working on this for 40 years. The main issues are not the most complex ones. We can actually solve a lot of the issues without any money coming from outside, just by moving our actions. And that allows a community to get empowered and start going up the pyramid. And then, yes, getting more resources, but as they're better prepared to manage them, it's more efficient. So one simple low-hanging fruit. I mean, agriculture is biology, it's not chemistry. If we can shift this around, we're at 280 parts per million in 20, 30 years. Why don't we ask the chemical companies, the chemical agriculture, to put a logo that it is chemical if it's so good? Why do we require the people who are doing it good to spend money to be able to certify organic? So we've done this, we've tried it out, and we're having huge success. We're just launching a project yesterday in our tourist area to convert a tourist area that broke down because of COVID, that they have no food. And instead of giving out food on a daily basis to people that have no money, we are turning them into farmers and getting community farms rolled out. We're working with Alan on moving the whole cattle system of Costa Rica to regenerative, to carbon negative. We are using other knowledge that's not only academia knowledge. This is a good friend of mine, Manuel Castellanos. He's an indigenous from the Lacandon area in Chiapas. This is a piece of land which was started about 30 years ago. This picture is kind of old. It was 9 years after they got this abandoned, unusable, degraded land to build it back. And Manuel was able to create a forest, whereas all the high tech of this Western university, I won't mention the name, it didn't even get beyond a weed stage. And you can stick your hand in 30, 40 centimeters and you feel like eating this delicious smell of soil. That's 5% carbon in that soil right there. And we have now the science behind it. Finally, scientists are opening up to accepting the importance of capturing carbon out of the sky and putting it beneath our feet. So the science is out there. We also have these huge other fundamental tools, the principles of regenerative economy from my friend John. If we can put them to work within our traditional system and move them to a new system, Christian with his economy for the common good. We'll have both of them on the 26th. These are proven things. They work. Now we just need to start using them. WellBeing Economy Alliance. I'm really proud to be a member of the Global Council. This is a tremendous, powerful platform which is really taking speed now. Balance Beyond is this new initiative, and Steve is going to talk about this on the last day. How are we able to support all these initiatives that might be a little bit loose and each one trying to fight a battle? Bring them all together. It's not or, it's and. So how can we join efforts to bounce beyond to a better future? We have also other tools. 7 Vortex is allowing us to map the complexity of our Regenerative Costa Rica program and really work out the individual components which we have to prioritize. We're going to be using Blue Marble evaluation. It's one of the best evaluation processes for complexity. And we're starting to fund this with seeds, an alternative currency, to be able to really escape the traditional system. We'll have seeds on a panel on the 27th. So I truly believe that with regenerative development, we can actually bring back our ecological capacity to be way above our footprint. Now we need to educate for this. So what does this education look like? First, we need to teach these kids to face the challenges that are coming. It's useless to prepare them for professions that won't solve the problems that we didn't solve last century and up to 2020. So the fact that they think that they can rebuild their future, if we give them the hope and if we give them the help, that is the focus on education. So we are answers if we act. Nobody is going to solve this. No president, no United Nations is going to solve it. Only us acting individually and collectivizing that action to community level, to country level, to planetary level. Using principles like the Earth Charter principles allow that to see whatever you want, but principles, ethics, transparency, and getting rid of the concept of soft skills, which universities are still calling soft skills. I call them important skills. These are the critical skills for change. So what do we really need to learn? How do we learn it? Classrooms? Kids sitting in rows with a teacher standing up above their heads? I don't think so. Why do we learn? Where do we learn it? We should be learning the world in nature. And it's ridiculous that we still measure learning with exams, which really have no correlation with the learning process and even less correlation with the capacity as a professional. I was a horrible student throughout my whole educational process. I just got bored in class. I just couldn't think of why I would be sitting there listening to a teacher that many times never got his feet in the mud. So moving away from competition to collective learning, to co-creating, to actually having every single human being part of it. You need to combine a Nobel Peace Prize, a Nobel Economic Prize, a Nobel Physics Prize with a farmer, with an indigenous person. All knowledge will be necessary. We need to cooperate instead of compete. We need to co-create. We need responsibility. We need creativity, mindfulness, resilience, adaptability, proactivity. We need to move people to act. And this can all be done with passion and with spirituality. I tell kids when I talk with them, who is studying this career because of passion? Very few of them. And I tell, okay, the people who are doing it for passion, look, keep on. But the rest, get up and leave while you have time. Do whatever you want in life, but do it with passion and you'll be successful. We've started these alternative programs at the University of International Cooperation. We already launched the certificate in regenerative entrepreneurship. We got the most marvelous people, a lot of the ones I mentioned throughout my talk, really willing to collaborate and give all their wisdom on to young people. And we're launching these new programs on first responders for regeneration. So let's say, I hate to use a word but that was the first one. We used the SWAT teams for regeneration to go into degraded areas and have the capacity to regenerate it and build their own lives while they're doing it. And with Regenerative Communities Network that was sponsored by Capital Institute, we have this whole global network that's growing. And so we'll have academic programs. Jim already mentioned that with Ubiquity and UCI, we're going to be launching some of these programs. We can give the whole academic background online and have the students go to wherever they want around the planet and practice regeneration in sites that are doing regeneration. This is, for me, the future of learning, a global regenerative university, focus on collaboration, focus on co-creation. We can co-create solutions between Norway and Costa Rica and New Zealand. We're actually running initiatives, and this won't be registered in a degree hanging on the wall. We have to develop something like a passport where we have abilities, success stories, networking for each student. So let us really enjoy this time to start celebrating life joyfully and move on to regeneration of the planet, of us. Leonardo Boff, and this is an older publication, he was already saying that we are in a new phase of humanity. We're all returning to our common house, the earth, the people, the societies, the cultures, and the religions. Exchanging experiences and values, we enrich ourselves and we complete ourselves mutually. And those obstructionist attitudes, even on the part of believers, can range from denial of the problem to indifference, nonchalant resignation, or blind confidence in technical solutions. I don't believe we should be investing billions in machines to capture CO2. The best machine to capture CO2 is all that green that's outside your window. We just have to give it a chance and support it and regenerate these ecosystems, their capacity, regenerate the ocean's capacity to start fixing carbon again in large quantities. The determination which this 6-year-old kid was walking in a biosphere reserve in Honduras, coming to talk with me because she wanted answers. That is what we really need to support. This creativity, this curiousness on how to build a future together through universal solidarity. So, how do you want to emerge? Your community, your country, your planet. And what are you going to do about it? How can you be part of the solution and not just point at the problem? What actions can you take individually? This is what we have to collectivize. And my big question is for my 8-year-old son, will we actually act on time? Is there still time? I believe so. If we wait another 5 years, I don't believe there will be time anymore to reverse the damage that is exponential. Our biggest problem is we were educated not only reductionist, but also linear. And change now is exponential. And we're not capable of understanding what that means. If we give 30 strides walking, we'll go 30 meters in a linear fashion. If we give 30 exponential strides, we go 26 times around planet Earth. And that is a speed that things have picked up on. So thank you for listening. And I would actually like to open it up to Ross and Steve. Ross is a very famous economist. Anybody has heard of eco-villages, has heard of Ross Jackson. And Steve has a huge trajectory. I've learned a lot of the transformation process, transformation thinking from Steve. So I'm really happy to be sharing this with you. And I'll open it up first to Ross. So Ross, please go ahead, give your thoughts.
Thanks very much, Ed. I thought that was a very inspiring presentation you made, very, very moving in many respects. One of the things that really caught my attention was your comment about the way that it seems that the world is kind of collapsing or falling apart around us. And I sometimes think that, you know, if if geologists are ever going to look back upon this short period in geological time, I think this period we're living through right now will look like an explosion. And I feel sometimes that we are experiencing this explosion or implosion in slow motion. We just, all the signs are all around us. And that was one of the takeaways I got from some of your talk. Also, you were suggesting initially that what we really need is examples that we can follow, things that people can actually do in their own personal lives. And as you mentioned, one of the major focuses of my way of contributing to this transition has been by co-founding the Eco-Village movement, and also in the area of education, the two areas which I think are quite important in the transition. The idea of the Eco-Village movement, which started about 30 years ago, was basically to lead by example, by showing how we can change lifestyle and not only reduce the impact on the ecological system, but also to show that there is actually a better way of living, with a greater focus upon community rather than just thinking in terms of individualism. And this is a way of getting back to nature and at the same time having a better lifestyle. And so this is when we started out, I remember mentioning that this is probably going to take at least 40 years to break through. And it's been developing very slowly, but we've got another 10 years or so left. And it's interesting that the end of that 40-year period coincides with 2030, which everybody is talking about as the real key year to look forward to in terms of decreasing our CO2 emissions. A word on education. I think education is very, very important in making this transition. I mean, education at all levels. You talked a lot about the need for understanding nature and regeneration of ecosystems and biodiversity. We should be teaching children right from kindergarten about these principles. We should not be putting so much emphasis, in my opinion, on math and language in the early years. We should be focusing on personality, on developing the child's ability to understand the world that we're living in. And being close to nature is a major part of that. And so I think that Ubiquity University has a really important role to play in the coming years in introducing online education to a much, much greater part of the world. And with this recent development in the coronavirus, where people are getting more and more used to communicating via the internet, I think it looks to me like it's just the perfect timing. So good luck for Ubiquity. I'd also like to make a little comment about donut economics. One of the things I've always thought was very important for decision makers in government in particular was to have some kind of a tool whereby they could sort of keep the big picture in front of them all the time. It's so easy to get diverted into small, less important things. And so the idea of having a tool like the donut diagram, something which you can look at physically every quarter or whatever, at the level of top levels of government, both national governments, municipal governments, regional governments, and have a discussion about how are we doing? How are we managing on these different dimensions of sustainability? See, I've always been opposed to the idea that you can just look at the cost benefit in terms of dollars and cents for different alternatives. In real life, real decisions are multidimensional, and there's no way you can convert a multidimensional issue into a single measure of dollars. And so that's why this tool is so important, because here any decision-making group can sit around a table and discuss the various aspects of these multidimensional problems. And that's really the only way to do it in practice. And so that's a great tool that we have developed here. It may not be the final answer, and there are many other tools that could be worked on, but I think the idea of having such a tool in front of the big decision makers in governments is a very, very major breakthrough and important. Finally, I would just say, I've been, like most of you here and on this panel, I've been around for a number of years working in various ways towards this transition. And I feel that I have a sense that a lot has been happening very recently, very positively. I know in the eco-village movement and co-housing movements, there's been a tremendous upsurge here in Europe here just over the last couple of years. And more young people, families, and also older people are looking more and more to the idea of living together in community as a way to combat, the very, very confusing times that we're living in. So turning back to our roots, turning back to the basic ideas of living in a community and close to nature, I think is a subject which is getting more and more attention, and I'm very glad to see it happening. So back to you, Ed.
Thank you, Ross, for that. Yeah, when I look at trajectories like yours, these have been pathways for me, and thank you for that. I think we all have to keep our minds open that we're going to be in a continuous learning process, and it's going to really require all our neurons to be active to be able to come up with solutions that are really scalable very quickly. As you mentioned, it's a slow evolution, but we're at a stage where we need to also respond to the exponential changes of the planet and of society with exponential solutions. And I think that's one of the reasons why we put this week together. We hope that we will actually get the traction to be able to bounce beyond. And there I'll pass this on to Steve, because he is the head behind the concept of bouncing beyond. So Steve, please come on and join us.
Thank you so much, Edward. I feel so warmed by your passion and groundedness in the urgency of the situation. I share this totally, as you know. Before COVID came around, I was a bit despairing about how we would actually insert the amount of urgency that we need. And I think that COVID has challenged the status quo systems which are producing these crises in a way that we have a unique opportunity. So some people do refer to bouncing back. Some people refer to bouncing forward better. We've picked up on something that Tony Hodgson, who's a great writer on transformation, wrote about with bouncing beyond. And what we mean by bouncing beyond is to bounce into a new paradigm. We've got to be categorical at this point about that we're paradigm shifters. This is not an incremental change that we're aiming for. And I feel very frustrated often that people confuse their actions. People who are wanting to have big change, they confuse what they're doing or what others are doing with transformation. And I just want to be categorical about transformation for a moment, and to share something with you about the way we've learned to think about transformation. I've been working in this field for over 35 years, and it's only recently that we can actually talk about it and have a really meaningful conversation with a great number of people when this term is becoming used so much. But just to share with you for a moment this concept of transformation as a distinctive type of change. So a lot of change is incremental. It means, for instance, doing more of the same. So improving the energy efficiency of carbon fuels is an example. A lot of change is reform. Ending carbon subsidies is an example. But what we've got to aim for is carbon neutrality, or carbon re-putting it back into the ground. And that's what transformation is about. So these are, the reason I emphasize the distinction between these is because they require different tools, different actions, different places to start. So we can see down in the action logic, the core here is a question around project implementation, efficiency. How can we be more efficient? How can we get more out of the same? The core for the action logic in reform is piloting. We're going to be trying to be more effective. The core for transformation is saying, what are we being effective for? It's asking the basic questions about our goals, why we're around, what we want for our futures. Do we want to have more energy, or do we want to have sustainable energy? It's a big change, but it's happening. We can do these things, but we've got to be explicit about our goals and the scale of change that we want. So that's what I'm so pleased to be working with Edward and others on. In this effort, we've created a community called the SDG Transformations Forum, which is really a very modest-sized community, which is coming together around this need to greatly accelerate our efforts for this change. We know a lot now that is not being brought to bear on these change problems. We're still caught in the old world. I know I've been a great fan of the Planet Emergencies group, and I think that they're aiming for the right way, but they're not taking the tools that they need to take seriously. This is a group that grew out of the Club of Rome, and it's very focused upon government engagement. They circulated a statement yesterday about how the EU has actually gone backwards in comparison to its April commitments. And the EU is probably the most progressive entity in the world in terms of government, in terms of actually doing something to create the green economy. And then they've gone to the G20. The G20 isn't going to deliver on this. We've got to realize the depth of what transformation means. Edward was talking about this when he was talking about the very way we think, the way and Jim Ross, when he was talking about the way we're learning, the education systems we have. We're still depending upon an old education system that is not producing what we need. It's producing what's sustaining the traditional world. So a good friend, Karen O'Brien, she's one of the IPCC authors, the authors of was one of the group that won the Nobel Prize for the IPCC work they were doing. She wrote a very critical report that, with others, reviewing global science initiatives. There are these things actually that are called global science initiatives, and anyways, not to go into that too deeply, but she was asked by the global science initiatives in 2012, 2013, this group was asked, what is it that we're doing wrong as global science or as science, given that we've been pointing and describing these issues for so long, the problems? If we were so great, these problems wouldn't exist. They'd just be simply acted upon. There's something wrong with the way we're approaching the world as science. And they came back with two key findings. One, we're actually divided amongst ourselves into disciplines. We don't actually have a holistic view ourselves about the way we work and about what science means. So we ourselves are fragmented. And then the second one was the ivory tower critique. Actually, we aren't doing something that's really meaningful and helpful and engaged with communities and people. We've got to create new ways of engaging with people. So this is a critique that's been, now it was put out very clearly in 2014 in a report, and it's just talking about one piece of the world. But we've got to stop focusing so much attention and resources on describing the problems and doing something about them. Now, there is an important role, as you could see when I was talking about transformation, in visioning. It's a visioning process where we're going to actually be able to understand that we have different futures that are possible, different than the ones that we've been told about, or the ones that are possible. I'm totally behind Edward when he says it's wrong to think that we've got to adapt to a less desirable future. Certainly we're evolving with our relationship with nature, with each other. We've got to evolve into our potential. That's what these people working on next economies are working about. How do we create relationships where we can work into our highest potential and highest aspirations instead of always being felt like we're beaten up and told we're unrealistic? This is the basis of our own evolution as a species in terms of creating the societies of equity, the societies at one with nature, the societies where we can actually evolve into our highest potential. This is what Edward is talking about when he's talking about this in Costa Rica, regeneration. The concept of regeneration was a big breakthrough for me because I was so tired of sustainability, which is so captured by the status quo. We aren't about sustaining the current system. That's called capture by the status quo, if that's what you're out for. And we know the direction the status quo is going in terms of all the trends. We've got to be much more inspired, aggressive about the actions we're going to take to move beyond what the status quo will do to capture us. So what's happened with this planetary emergency group, you could say, I mean, it isn't a fair reflection, but you can see how the current system is trying to capture it so that they're putting all their attention onto the government and all these forces. I had an experience in 2008 with the global financial crisis. I was leading something called the Global Finance Initiative. The question was, how can we integrate the imperative of sustainability into the global finance system? I went to the UN because there were a lot of people, because of the global financial crisis, going to the UN, demanding the UN take action. There were a lot of NGOs that went to the UN wanting change. What I learned was two basic things there that rest with me forever. Number one, the UN, if you understand the global architecture of the global finance system, the UN has been designed not to have any role meaningfully in the global finance architecture. That's in Washington, D.C., that's at the World Bank, that's in the Basel Accord, that's where the bankers get together, right? These are such hidden organizations, people don't even talk about them popularly. So they were asking the UN to do something in a system that the UN was designed out of. The second thing was they started, the NGOs were thinking, well, this is great. We're at the UN. It's a big international organization. We can do something here. I like being associated with this big organization, etc. And so they got talking about page 93, subparagraph 2. There should be another word inserted in that subparagraph. You know how that went. The whole thing, all of these resources from the NGO community was put into trying to shift something that they were simply captured by. And it's not like the UN is an evil place, but it is part of the H1, the first horizon, the system that we're living in today. We've got to move beyond this. So when people talk about policy change, we did some work a few years ago asking people involved in transformation, what is it that's holding you back from being even more successful at your transformation work? Now, lots of people think about policy, and so we had conversations about policy, et cetera, et cetera. So what they told us when we really had deep conversations was it's not policy that's holding us back. We've put lots of energy into policy. We know what the policies are we should want. It's actually the policy-making process. It's the governance structures that we have today. So this moves into a very scary territory for a lot of people because we're actually going through a change process in governance that's as great as the movement from absolute monarchies to representative democracy. And Edward and others working in this next economies world are working on the next governance system. They've got to. You know, one thing that's very interesting about Costa Rica is that they've set up territorial councils. They have been dealing with this governance challenge to be able to change the governance system. So it's the depth of these challenges that we've got to address. That's what we're doing through Bounce Beyond, which I'm happy to talk with you more about. I'm proud that Edward's engaged in it. And it's still at a proposal stage, but we're very clear about what needs to be done. And we can do it. We can make this paradigm shift to next economies. People are already working on it, like Ross, like the Doughnut economies with Kate, like thrivability, like circular economies. All of these things, there's a confusion of labels that we're bringing together to be able to shift this world to the future that we all can realize we have the potential for. So thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That was great. That's real energy for the discussions we're going to have. I'm going to pass this back to Jim. He was going to lead the question and answer period. If I'm not wrong. Is that correct, Jim?
Yes.
Good.
Well, thank you, Ed, first of all, and Ross and Steve. The common thread is a sense of urgency about trying to discern some way forward that could actually make a difference. And, you know, Steve, what you were just saying about the UN, I mean, that's the irony and the tragedy of our current situation, that everybody looks to the UN, but the UN by design is incapable of implementing the solutions we seek. It's happening elsewhere, you know, and so we have a real issue. And I think that's where I'd like to begin, maybe starting with you, Ed, and then Ross and Steve. Given what you know, both about the world as it currently is, as dysfunctional as it is, and given what you know about our international institutions and so forth and so on, where would you put the acupuncture needle? Where do you think we can get sort of the most bang for the buck, as it were? You know, we've gotten very excited about donut economics because it feels to me, and I know to Ed and others, that Kate Raworth is onto something. It's like an idea whose time has come. Major cities are beginning to orient around that. Is that where we should be working at the city level? You know, Ross, you put together the Global Eco-Village Network, which is thousands of intentional communities from all over the world. You know, is it time to go off grid because it's basically beyond the point of no return? Where would each of you put the priority for strategic action?
It's not one acupuncture point. And that is the image of the inverse triangles on resources and problems is what we have to focus on. Where is the low-hanging fruit? So what is our main problem today? Going back to the planetary boundaries, it's biodiversity loss, fertilizer use. Those are the two most critical points that have a feedback loop with climate change and land use change. And we know we're getting to critical points in climate change, but we won't solve that with electric cars. And a lot of people are thinking that the transition to electric cars is going to solve climate change. We already have too much CO2 in the atmosphere, so we have to bring it down. And that is just by shifting the way we produce food. And that can be done extremely quickly. If the consumers ask where their food is made, how it's made, how far it's shipped to them before they buy, they can switch even this big unmovable corporations to move away from poisoning food, to move away from poisoning the environment, to moving away from their only profit look at production. So all of the efforts, I'm not saying electric cars are not needed. If we can lower emissions, good. You have to take into account the batteries and the slavery of the kids bring out the cobalt and that, but that's another issue. But let's not go for the tip of the iceberg. Let's get what's in our hands. If we transform, a big problem in cities is residues. So if we make organic waste in every single household a valuable product, because it will turn into compost, which will go into the gardens, into the parks, into all the green areas in urban places, to transform those into carbon capture systems. Have food forests along our streets, trees with fruit instead of just trees with leaves. Having each garden get rid of the roses, except where the roses are native, and bring back life. I just put weeds in my garden, and now we're actually counting every day with my son the new species of butterflies that are coming. And it's been over a year, and we already have over 30 different types of butterflies coming to my garden in the middle of the city, just by me shifting away from the plants that originally the house has, it's a rented house, to just letting native plants come in or bringing native plants in. So everything is summing up, but let's put our efforts where we really have low-hanging fruit, and that will be different in Amsterdam, in San Jose, or in China. But globally, the most important thing is bring biodiversity back and take carbon out of the atmosphere and start ruining the other ecosystems like the oceans and things like that. And those are things that can be done easily. We don't need 50 years of decarbonization strategy to do that. We do need that under the traditional framework Steve was pointing at, because it's incremental. How many years will it take till our fleet of cars goes to electric instead of gasoline? It will be forever. But if we can capture all that carbon by turning all our food into delicious food without any pesticides, getting our cattle to produce delicious beef. I'm sorry for the vegans, that's not the solution to climate change. And there I do believe my friend Alan Savory. I've seen the capacity. Our farms that are doing regenerative holistic grazing are adding 1 centimeter of topsoil per year to their land with cattle. It's a holistic thinking. So let's just start with whatever we can do, everything will sum up. But what we cannot do is stay sitting, waiting to adapt and waiting for somebody to do something.
Powerful point. And I think, Ed, you're speaking to something that's come up as a theme. If just the consumers would become conscious of their choices, that might be the most radical solution in the world, because everything follows the choices of the consumer.
Let me add something, Jim, because it's a tremendous opportunity with so many people listening. We've been fighting off pineapple production. We are the largest exporter. We have found areas of the country where the aquifers are totally contaminated with pesticides because of the pineapple production. They're spraying schools with children inside with their airplanes. It's almost impossible to stop them because of the corruption of money. No, it's an import-export product that really brings cash to the country. I would just ask every single consumer of pineapple in Europe and the US not to buy pineapple from Costa Rica unless the farmer can say, we're not using pesticides, we're not using fertilizer, we're not destroying forest. We have 13,000 hectares of wetlands that were destroyed over the last few years to become the #1 exporter of pineapple. I can fight here and people will be bribed by these companies, and they're international companies, many of them. But if the consumers say, I only want to buy pineapple from Costa Rica if you can actually prove that it is doing good for the environment and for society. We have a huge outburst of COVID when we opened the economy because of these companies putting pressure. And what they did was bring illegal migrants from Nicaragua that were COVID positive to our country, not to pay them social security. That is wrong. So don't buy pineapple from these companies, and I bet you in 3 months they'll have changed their systems around.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. And if there's thousands of similar examples if the consumer would just become conscious. So thank you for that. Ross, what would you say? Where would you put the...
Yeah, well, I was inspired by Steve's comment about the need for a new governance paradigm, which I agree with 100%. And it got me to thinking about some of the global issues we face in the political economic sense. And I would start by asking a little question: what do the following organizations have in common? The United Nations, the League of Nations, and the EU. What do they have in common? Well, I'll tell you what they have in common. They were all started by a small group of 5 or 6 countries that got together and said, we would like to make a change of governance. We'd like to do something new. And this concept of a small group being able to make major changes is the way it happens in practice. You don't change the governance system by having 193 countries sit around on a table in the United Nations. No, too many people. You need a small group dedicated to making a proposal and then saying, we are going to do that. Well, that was precisely what I suggested in my book, Occupy World Street, which came out about 8 years ago, where I suggested that perhaps a group of small countries could do this. The big countries, forget it. You know, you're not going to get China or the US or even the EU perhaps to take the initiative on this, but a number of smaller countries, in fact, Costa Rica was one of the ones I mentioned, could get together and tell the rest of the world, we're going to form a new organization. I call it the Gaia League, but whatever. And say, we are going to delegate seed sovereignty to an international organization in 2 areas, and 2 areas only: the area of environment and human rights. And so this international agency will be able to tell us and intervene in our countries in order to help us make changes and legislation in these areas. The idea of having an environmental agency which could dictate policy is very similar to what the EU has already today. My thinking was that if you could have such an initiative that, you know, really had the possibility of, for the first time ever, coordinating international activities in the area of economics. You know, we've never been able to find a way of cooperating in finding, for example, a way to handle externalities. I mean, the idea has been around in theory for almost 100 years, but it's never been possible to implement it because you've never had the willingness to cede any sovereignty or any authority to any international agency. So this is one idea of an acupuncture point, maybe that could really be a game changer if there were a few countries that were able to make such an initiative. And if they did, I think, as a matter of fact, others would join the same way they did with the United Nations, with the League of Nations, and with the EU. Just an idea I'm throwing out.
Well, I mean, you're speaking great wisdom there, Ross. I mean, it was Margaret Mead that says that it's only when a small group of people come together that anything really changes. And in fact, she says it's the only way a great change takes place. Of course, that's also echoed by Arnold Toynbee's study of history, where he studied the 23 extant civilizations that we know about. And he said over and over, it was a small, what he called a creative minority that got onto an idea or a vision, and like a dog with a bone, just didn't let go. And then the next thing they knew, they were the center of a critical mass and either they seized power or the civilization changed. But I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the reasons why what's happened recently with Amsterdam and now Copenhagen, where without waiting for the government, without waiting for the EU's permission, you have two cities now are embracing donut economics. Copenhagen hasn't finally, but is on its way. That then becomes an attractor. So the logic of what you're saying is deeply embedded in history, and it is a powerful way to think about the future. And again, it's it really, in some ways, it's back to Buckminster Fuller. You don't change by trying to transform the old regime. You just build what's new, and if it's in alignment with the time, it will create its own victory.
Yeah, you got it. That's it.
Well done. Well done. Steve, what would you say? What would you say? We've gotten a consumer and we've gotten a small group of people. What would you say? What would you say?
Well, I think both of those are meaningful. I come from a particular point of view as being a community organizer. So I think of myself as organizing global communities. And so I'm always looking at how do we actually deal with the scale and the complexity, time periods, et cetera, that have to do with transformation, because that's what the communities I'm working with are interested in and working on. I spent a dozen years working with something that I call global action networks. These are global multi-stakeholder organizations. They are an organizing innovation. We've never had these types of organizations before. It includes the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, the Forest Stewardship Council, Transparency International. These organizations grew with enormous rapidity. They just within a couple of years, they were in many countries of the world. So we've learned something about how to organize. The last book I wrote is called Change for the Audacious, A Doer's Guide to Transformation. So I will, out of all of these lessons, out of all of this work I've been doing over the years, there's one thing that I emphasize, and that's the concept of transformation systems, and to understand how to develop transformation systems. So by transformation systems, I mean, everyone on this call, I bet, is involved in a transformation system. You're just not aware that you are, because you're thinking about what I'm doing or what my organization is doing. And what I'm urging people to do is to understand how they're fitting in to the whole ecosystem of change. Because once you can think of yourself as part of an ecosystem of change, you can then take much more effective action. So it's about us becoming more effective. That's the acupuncture point, I would say, about our awareness of how we fit into a change system, how our change efforts can connect with one another much more effectively. So just like we have a healthcare system to deal with our physical and mental well-being, we have transformation systems to support the development of transformation, but they're very under-articulated, if put it that way, under-recognized. And until we can start naming them and understanding the dynamics in them and how we relate and develop them, we're going to have a lot of weak transformation processes. So one way I think of modeling the relationship of a transformation system to the status quo is this DNA double helix. One of the threads is the traditional status quo system. It's focused upon producing, managing, the production system of government, the production system of business. The other system is focused upon trying to change that system. It's this type of combat that we're involved in. There's got to be lots of linkages or else it's not going to work. So then I think of people undertaking 4 different strategies to be able to deal with transformation. One is the lever strategy. Let's create multi-stakeholder collaborations like FSC. Yes, great strategy. One is, let's start by doing something new. I don't have time to talk to all those people. It's not in my nature. I don't want to be involved in a collaboration. I'm going to go out and show you how it's being done, as a social entrepreneurs. Then there's the warriors. Listen, you've got to change. I'm passionate about this. I'm going to go to the street. I mean, this can result in civil war at an extreme. And they're part of the change system too. And then there's the people who are internal to traditional systems. It might not be something you want to talk about or deal with because your nature isn't there, but something's got to be done about the traditional systems. So we have great examples with Paul Pullman at Unilever, grappling with this very big question. We have the energy transition that been happening in Germany, where some of the traditional energy companies have simply disappeared. They've been bought off into different, either gone bankrupt, some of them, but they've generally split into new enterprises, done something very different. So if you look at change from the point of view of accepting, we've got to have destruction of the old. That's a hard thing a lot of people don't like to talk about, but we are destroying the old. We're getting rid of it. We've got to have creation of the new. Yes, we've got to think about, act very differently, have very different organizations. We've got to have confrontation, because a lot of people don't get it until there's confrontation. Confrontation puts energy into the system, and we've got to have collaboration to figure out how to do it together. So that's the last point that we're focusing on, is how to bring together these strategies to be able to do together. And this is what a transformation system is about. We one time talked about business, government, civil society collaborations. Today, we're talking about how to create collaborations amongst these different change agents, change strategies. And these things are real. A transformation system can be mapped. This is one way of mapping it based upon websites. So this is mapping the linkages, hyperlinks between different websites. This is the global electricity transformation system. I was involved in pulling this together. You can actually then talk about how are we doing as a global energy system, electricity transformation system. So in my mind, the answer is in terms of thinking of what is the collective strategy for change, because this is going to take a huge collective effort. Thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant. Well, I think in some ways you've hit the $64,000 question with an answer that I think is elusive but compelling. And at Humanity Rising, we've been talking about radical collaboration. Because I went through a thought experiment, Steve, in the middle of the pandemic, as we were thinking about Humanity Rising and so forth. And I thought, what would be one thing that the progressive movement could do to enhance their strategic effectiveness? And it's not coming up with more solutions, because the solutions are already here, right? It's not trying to change a dying system, because historically that's not possible. But what we can do is engage in radical collaboration. And it's worth just underscoring the importance of what you're saying. There's an old joke in the movement that the way in the right wing, when they form up a firing squad, they're in a line. Everybody's disciplined and they shoot at the target. Among the progressives, we form a firing squad in a circle. And it's an amazing paradox of the progressive movement. And I mean by progressive, all those people out there that have goodwill, that are doing everything they can to make a better world. We talk in idealistic terms about, the fraternity of humankind and all of that. But when on the ground, we're competitive, we're isolated, we're in silos. And yet, if you look at Paul Hawken's book, Blessed Unrest, there's literally tens of millions of NGOs around the world. If you look at the value proposition of Paul Ray, for example, the sociologist Paul Ray, around the cultural creatives, 35 to 40% of the US public and the public in the EU and in Japan and in cosmopolitan cities around the world agree with our value proposition.
Mm.
But the data shows that for the most part, they all think they're alone because they don't see these value systems refracted back to them through the media, through the prevailing institutions, the educational system, or any of the civic organizations. So they think they're the only one in their neighborhood. But we're actually the largest value proposition on planet Earth right now. It's really this opportunity for radical, proactive collaboration is maybe what links the creative minorities that Ross is talking about with the power of the consumer that Ed was talking about. And that's what we're trying to foster in Humanity Rising. How do all of us proactively, almost promiscuously, collaborate with one another, and not with a view of even self-interest, but what can I do to support you? And I must just say, Ed, I just want to take a moment, everyone, to really thank Ed Muller. The way you just jumped up, and you too, Steve, just jumped up and said, hey, man, let's do this, was just extraordinary. And here we are with a 7-day program. And then I came in with Ross, and Ross has been generous in different ways. And all of a sudden we're here because we've all been radically collaborative. So anyway, I just want to applaud those comments of yours. And I'd like to turn maybe to a final question that came out of the chat by a guy named Paul Coleman. I think he's asking a very interesting question. He points out that it was Alvin Toffler. Remember Alvin Toffler in Future Shock? That was back in the 60s. That's 60s, everyone, 60 years ago. He says we're all suffering from future shock. He says the pace of change is escalating so radically in every category of human affairs that we no longer psycho-emotionally have the capacity to respond in anything other than a reactive way. And if you look at the last 60 years between 1960 and 2020, Alvin Toffler was right. We're all in future shock, and now we're being hit by a pandemic. So my question to each of you, maybe starting with you, Steve, and then Ross, and then Ed, and then we can do another round of closing comments. What would be, and I think I mentioned in the opening, the knowledge, human knowledge is doubling every 12 and a half minutes, right? 2/3 of the jobs that were here 10, 15 years ago don't exist, and 2/3 of the jobs that exist today won't exist in 10 years. So the speed and the velocity and the omnipresence of change, radical change in every category is just spinning out of control. And in the middle of it, human beings have to somehow understand it, cope with it, come together and solve it. I'd love to have your comments on future shock.
Well, I'm so pleased somebody's brought it up. I often refer to Alvin Toffler and say, he was writing about this. I think Future Shock came out in 72. And here we are nearly 50 years later, and thinking that we can do something about something that is, as you pointed out, Jim, has greatly accelerated. So the two things for me are one of, I'm a practicing Buddhist, and I greatly value the sense of impermanence combined with the sense of equanimity. So it's about our own evolution as individuals. This is our individual challenge about how to live with that degree of change. And when we talk about what we learn at school, it's we are learning very funny things at school, because as we know, a lot of them will be irrelevant by the time we get out of school or whatever.
Really?
So these are the types of things that we should be learning about. So it's a big shift in our whole mental model to say, actually, it's impermanent, because we're always trying to hold on to the current thing we like, and then try to accumulate more of that. And that's not the way the world works. That's basically not the way the world works. So one thing is on our individual relationship with reality. Another thing is on the organizational relationship of reality. Government was created in its current dominant form. It only arose after the First World War as representative democracy as being a dominant form. Before that, it was still empires, Russia, Austria, Germany, etc., as a dominant form. But it's grounded in the 18th century. That was a very different period of life. It was very different structures, very different pace. They weren't dealing with this future shock syndrome. And yet we continue to think that the current government structures, the current way we've organized things, is supposed to be able to deal with this great pace of change. We've got to deal with the fact these are unreasonable ideas, that this current decision-making structure dominant governance structure, this refers to all of our structures, the business structures, etc. These cannot handle the pace of change. They cannot absorb it. So it's got to do something basic with our way we're organizing differently. So B Corps are an example of that. New collaborations as ways of dealing with great complexity and diversity are ways of new governance forms. So we've got to stop thinking that government can deliver something it can't deliver.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Ross, how do we deal with future shock?
Well, my response, I guess something like Steve's would be to think about the spiritual dimension, as a matter of fact. Things can be so utterly confusing with so many things going on, so much information, so much data, so many different problems hitting us all at once. I think one of the reasons we have so many problems and such diversity of opinions and actions in this world is that very few people apparently understand the nature of our life. Now, some people may not agree with me on this, but my own feeling is that we are all spiritual beings experiencing what it's like to live in the physical and to deal with the issues that arise. And this may seem very radical to some people, but I think it's very fundamental. And it is a refuge for me personally, and I think for many others, to sense that sense of a connection with something much greater than this physical world. And that no matter what happens, we will survive this world and we will go on. This is one page out of many, many pages in our spiritual development. I've always been very inspired by the words of the Indian avatar, Krishna, in the Bhagavad Gita, where he lectures the families who are at war. He says, do not think of the fruits of your labor. That's so important. And it's the very opposite of what everybody's normally thinking today. What am I going to get out of this? What's our country going to get out of this? Instead, we should just do what is right. Do what we feel is right, and just let it happen, whatever the consequences are. Don't worry about the fruits of your labors. As long as you're doing the right thing, then you're okay. So my advice is to follow your heart, and everything will turn out fine.
The path with a heart. Thank you. Thank you, Ross. Ed, future shock.
Steve actually mentioned the amount of time that is wasted on defining the correct words, on getting to the perfection. I mentioned we're launching this program that has to produce food over the next few weeks for about 200,000 people that are without jobs and without income. and without possibilities to buy food. And the philanthropists are running out of resources, feeding them every day. And we've been discussing over the last 3 weeks and setting up budgets and setting up Excel sheets and everything. And yesterday, towards the end of the meeting, I said, look, if you want me in here, let's start one initial farm. Doesn't have to be perfect. If we wait for perfection, every minute we lose, somebody will suffer. So let's be imperfect and make it better as we move along. And this has to do with education too. So I was traditionally involved in the national universities, and I've been working on many different scales in many different universities around the planet. And I actually thought I could change one of these big institutions. And it was so frustrating. We got the resources, we got money from the Netherlands to do it, $25 million. And it was just impossible. And so I didn't know about Buck Fuller at that time, but I said, look, forget changing this, I'm gonna start my own. Now, if I would have waited for the perfect moment to start developing innovative programs 26 years ago on holistic approaches, I would have never made it because none of the teachers were prepared. I had to start by training the teachers. And we started having to recruit teachers from our own programs because one of the most difficult parts of establishing these alternative educational programs is not only finding the teachers that can shift, it's finding the teachers that are willing to unlearn. That is the most difficult component. So when we're developing any of our activities that we develop, we have we brought project management down to Latin America as an academic program, master's program, back in the 90s with the Project Management Institute, their first body of knowledge. By today, that program is totally immersed with regenerative development throughout. And it's taken time. It's taken time because it's hard to get people to think out of these global standards. No, we have to stick, these are guidelines. So we have to create our own things. And that actually, as we just mentioned before me, how do we quit wasting time defining the perfect sentence, finding the precise word that sometimes regular people won't even understand, instead of just starting to act and starting to do things? And I see why Steve is laughing. We really need to move forward and just start today, yesterday, doing things. And if we're co-creating, collaborating, we have a solid floor, maybe not solid, but a floor that gives us stepping stones enough to get the energy to jump forward. So yeah, let's take a step back, but just to get more stability to run forward. And let's just start moving forward with whoever adds on. I always say it's the train has left the station. We'll have a few stops for other people to jump on. But we're not going to slow the train because 99% of the people still don't want to hop on.
Yep. Well, good. Well, thank you all. We just have a little bit of time left. So I'm going to suggest Steve and Ross take them just a minute and just cap off whatever it is that you want to say. And then Ed, if you wanted to just sort of summarize in any way, and then we can, and then maybe tee up Kate and Andrew tomorrow. And then we'll say goodbye. Steve, just a final word.
I just feel a lot of appreciation for the work of everyone on the panel, but also the participants, people who have been listening to this. And I would urge you to take up Edward's suggestion on the doing and understanding where your passion is around, and do the doing too. Even just buying organic food instead of traditional produced food. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Steve's going to be back with us on the 29th in our grand finale, going into more detail on bouncing forward. Ross?
You know, one of the subjects which we haven't really talked much about today is economics. I just, in closing, mention that this is an area which I'm actually currently looking at. You know, the economic system is something which is man-made. It's something we can change. And I'm more and more asking myself the question, can we redesign the economic system to fulfill our real needs, to design the future that we really want? And I really believe it's possible to do that. I'm working on that problem, developing some computer models to get the fundamentals in place and discuss various different ways we could go about changing the way things actually work. So the economic system can work for us as well as against us.
Yes, yes, definitely, definitely. Well, maybe at a different time down the road, Ross, you can do a presentation on the outcome of your research. So we can be in touch on that. Okay, Ed, why don't you summarize the panel today and tee up tomorrow?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Ross and Steve and you, Jim, for this opportunity to really share some ideas. It has been fun for me. I always have fun when I give talks and get feedback. It's the passion of life that actually is what has us moving forward. I think we have the perfect layout to move forward on this week. I think it's very clear that change has to happen. I think it's very clear that change can happen. I think it's very clear that change is happening. And the idea is to unite efforts and bring people together. And this also requires an unlearning process, because I've worked with many NGOs and there's always competition for resources. And we've been brought up in this notion that we are under scarcity when nature actually gives abundance. So being able to break away from the ego, the individual, the whole education that given us on competition instead of going to collaboration. All our economic courses, Ross mentioned economy several times, we were taught to maximize output without bringing in the externalities, as Ross mentioned. We are taught, even in modern economics, ecological economics, which Costa Rica is actually a pioneer in that. Over a quarter century ago, we started working on ecological economics. Today, even though I was a very strong defender of that area of economics, and I brought those courses into my programs over 20 years ago, I'm not that convinced that you can actually put a price on everything. You can put a value, but not a price. And there's a big difference between putting value and price. And what we need to do now is value relationships, value dynamics. A system looked at from the European or the Western science and educational system is a bunch of components. And we literally dissect these components to death, trying to understand the system. If you go to any indigenous people, the system is interactions. The components are secondary to the interactions, but we're not able to look at these interactions because we have walls between our faculty. We have walls between our departments. We have walls, strong, huge, strong walls in our academic system, the rewarding system of peer-reviewed journals, which actually have made us go deeper and deeper and deeper into inaction. I think we have the stage set, and I really want to thank ahead of time all these people that have accepted to be part of this week-long process. I know many people are very busy. I know Kate is extremely busy. Catherine Trebek from WellBeing Economy Alliance, They all came back and said, Edward, yes, count me in. I'll do this for you. Somebody else even said, well, I'm not too sure about this, but we'll trust you. And I think that is the bottom of it. It's trust. It's friendship. The people I got on this panel is because we've gone past that academic barrier, because we're actually thinking the same, we're feeling the same, we're friends now. And that is what we need. That idea of Ross putting up together this group, it's friendship that will bring this together. It's people, it's not organizations that represent change. It's the people in the organizations and the relationships. It's not about how important or how old an institution is. It's who is in that institution at that moment. So tomorrow, having the opportunity of Kate giving her framework, she does it so beautifully, so emotional, so passionate. It's impossible not to pay attention to every word. And then have Andrew come in, who designed all these country donuts, which I used. And then the next day we have examples, Amsterdam, the city of Cali, Copenhagen. And now I just heard there are a few other cities that are already coming on. And I'll talk a little bit about Costa Rica. I actually will repeat some of it because I know not everybody will be listening to both sessions. But then we have those examples which you can follow. The day after, we have John Fullerton, Christian Felber. I'm sorry, the other person wasn't my contact. Who is it with John and Christian?
I'd have to look it up. I don't have it in front of me either.
These are people, brilliant people that stopped in their trajectory, in their professional career, to think about a new system. And some of it has been widely applied already in different parts of the world. But these are the instruments that will actually allow us to implement a regenerative process. The next day we have innovative approaches. We have seeds, join seeds. I was very skeptic of cryptocurrency until I came across seeds. Seeds is going to change the world. I'm totally sure. And these young people, it's young kids that are behind it, are just brilliant. It's a decentralized autonomous organization. It's not a CEO which is going to steer this to profit. I brought in Manolo, a good friend from Mexico, who has been working with some other incredible people on a new way of funding regeneration in Latin America. And then the WellBeing Economy Alliance is also a great movement. It has so much energy in it. And Catherine and Amanda will be speaking on We All and We Gov, the government section of it. And we already have examples like New Zealand that is going beyond GDP budget. I wish all our countries would go beyond that GDP focus. And then we end up with this bouncing beyond and the gain, the global assessment of new economies. And I think that is having been involved through Steve in the work of Bounce Beyond and its launch, which is basically right now. I'm totally confident that everybody in this series of webinars and outside of them will see it as an opportunity to collaborate. It's not competition. It's not duplicating efforts. It's actually allowing a stage where we can all collaborate and bring our suitcases and share what we have inside to start really getting the traction necessary. And I think that is exactly what we have to focus on, getting the traction necessary to really use this unique opportunity that COVID has given us to put the whole humanity on its knees and say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, nature. Thank you for this wake-up call. I'll rethink my relationship to you, because over these lockdown days, food, family, the school teachers, the guys who pick up the garbage in front of my house, those are the important people in my life. And it doesn't matter what size car or how much the car costs, it's still in the garage. So that's not going to make the difference. So just thank you all, and I hope to see you all throughout the the week. It's going to be growing and growing and growing in energy as we go along. Today was just a brief overview and introduction and preparing the stage. Thank you.
Oh boy, thank you so much, Ed and Ross and Steve. This has been an extraordinary dialogue, and it's just the opening salvo of a 7-day program, as Ed was just mentioning. And the gentleman that we couldn't name is Rick Scott, who's the author of A Heretic's Guide to Global Finance. And so that'll give you a measure of kind of the quality of the panel that we're going to have that day, along with John Fullerton. So we'll meet tomorrow, 5 o'clock to 7 o'clock p.m. Central European time, same station. And we'll listen to Kate Rayworth, Andrew Fanning on basically the fundamentals of donut economics. And then we'll have a lively discussion with them and with you all. But this is very exciting. And once again, Ed, thank you for convening this, and Ross and Steve for joining on this inaugural panel. It's a perfect kickoff to what we want to achieve. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow, 5 to 7 o'clock p.m. CET. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, Dave, Ed. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Went good, Jim.
Good one, man.
Thank
Good
you.
one.
Thank you. For
You're very good at what you do, Ed Muller.
The devil is wise not because of its intelligence, it's wise because it's old.